with Robert Szentes, and I'm so happy to see you because I know that you work a lot with helping people uncover things, and so I'm so excited about this interview to be able to see your story and see how you actually help peak performance and growth minded individuals to actually uncover things that are holding them back and heal and all amazing things. And so, Robert, would you mind telling us a little bit about your background?
Oh, absolutely. It's good to be here. I appreciate the invitation. My background is that I was a high-tech engineer, software and electrical engineer, then a manager for 15 years. About 11 years ago, I was paralyzed by a stroke. And it was a very huge turning point in my life, as you can imagine, because it's not a joke. I was very afraid, very scared, and I have been exposed to this miraculous thing I'm teaching today, which is subconscious change work. You know, in our subconscious mind, there are tens of thousands of emotions and thoughts and what I call programs that run. And a lot of my problems, relationship problems and money problems, and a lot of my health problems stemmed from my unresolved stories. And I spent the last 11 years, pretty much I quit my job and I spent the last 11 years focusing on figuring out the cause and effect of life in a very, very precise, systematic engineering manner, where I have now a system that can help people understand why their relationship keeps falling apart and how to fix it, why they have the same type of money rejection problem, why they under-earn and why they overspend and why they can't make more. So there's a very, very systematic logic to it, but it comes from a very different world. So kind of like the subconscious world. We are not conscious of it, and yet it's our background operating system. And that's what I focused on. You know, today I can share this with you and your audience, is that I have healed myself. You know, I certainly studied from world-class mentors. So this is not something that I just sat under a tree and pulled things out of thin air. So I really put almost like $1 million into my self-development and studied the world of the unconscious, studied the world of other dimensions, studied the world of the ego, studied the world of all these quantum psychological things. And I've been teaching live seminars for about 10 years and sharing this with people who are driven, people who want to make an impact, people who want to make a difference. So that's what I do. I love what I do. I teach, I share my wisdom, I share my knowledge, I nonstop improve, and I never hold back. So whenever I learn something, I double check to make sure it works, and I systemize it, and I hand it to my raving fans.
That's awesome, Robert. And Robert, with when you had the stroke, what sort of stroke was it? What type of stroke was it? What were some of the symptoms that you had at that time?
Okay, I don't know the name anymore because that was so long ago and I wasn't speaking the medical terminology. What happened was I was going to work, and I lived in San Diego, California at the time, and I was coming down from the second floor from our condominium in San Diego, and I wiped out. I literally just like a sack of potatoes just fell down. And then I stood up and I fell again. And I was like not willing to accept it because I thought I stumbled. I thought I missed a step or something. I stood up again, I walked into the door frame and then collapsed again, and I couldn't move. So it was one of those things that I had a strong will and I overrode it, but simply my body gave in. And then I went up to in Escondido, I don't know if you know, that's like a northern part of San Diego, and I saw a neurologist, and of course it was all kinds of tests and MRIs and stuff. It took me like literally 3 or 4 weeks just to get all the medical examinations done, and something in me was reluctant to accept that this is it. Part of me resigned. Part of me said, okay, I'm going to be a vegetable. But the other part didn't accept it. So somehow maybe life or God wanted me to really go with the part that didn't accept it.
And when you had the test gave you a diagnosis of a stroke, or
yes. It was back here. And you're a doctor, so the terminology. I absolutely have no idea.
Were you able to move? And so when you say you were willing to accept, what was it that you were not trying to accept, like moving and certain functions that you lost? Or
my left side, the arm and the leg stopped working. I couldn't carry myself. So it was just, I became almost like half-sighted. I felt like, when you, like a little worm gets stepped on and just kind of like, convulsing, and it's just very, very strange. And especially for me, because I was such a central character, manager. I was leading sales meetings. I was always on the phone with people. So I was like a very, as I mentioned, the central character, talking to people, meeting with people. All of a sudden, all of that was cut out. And I didn't know what to expect. It my life as I knew it ended. Wow. And, a lot of things go through people's minds. Like, okay, there's the sadness, there's the resignation, there's the anger, and then the rage. And I was no stranger to all those emotions, and it was very difficult. But then I was exposed to some subconscious change work and hypnotherapy, and then other subconscious work. And I got so interested in it. Apparently it's my path, that I started to deep dive into it. And as I was like healing a lot of my emotional things, which I had plenty of because I had a very, very traumatic childhood, my body started to wake up. And then I learned another few thousand things, and I applied, and my body woke up even more. And I also struggled a lot with digestive problems like IBS for 20 years. And, after like almost like 9 to 10 years of very diligent research and understanding the emotional root causes, I was able to finally leave that behind.
Wow. And I think that this is such a big part of that in healthcare. We don't have the tools, and we haven't integrated it enough where, of course we have psychiatry, and psychiatry is great for certain things, and it has very specific benefits to it. But, when you look at adverse childhood experiences, and the study that came out with Dr. Felitti, out of actually the San Diego area with Kaiser Permanente, he did some of the largest study on adverse childhood experiences. And I mean, just the fact that if you have 3 or more, you can have the chances of lung disease like 3, 4, 5 times more, depression, anxiety, stroke, heart attacks. And so it is incredible how tied all of that is, and how much in medicine we don't really have the tools, or we don't incorporate the teams necessary to be able to help patients deal with that, because they get out of the hospital after a stroke, and there is nothing. Who's going to help them like go through it like what you went through, Yeah.
I really appreciate it, especially coming from you as a doctor, because, I don't know what you know. And of course, you know incredible things, but what I have dedicated my life to is this, exploring the underlying emotional causes of situations, life circumstances, medical conditions, relationship conditions, money conditions. And it's a remarkable logic. Everything really is very predictable. It's just so, but when you learn to, when you've been driving a car for a year, many, many years, you don't even think about it. You turn the wheel and you know exactly how much to turn it. You know exactly how the car is going to behave. You no longer jerk the car when you apply the brakes. It's a very smooth operation. And that's what I discovered. It's like when I look at people, and I can even hear it through their language. Yeah. And I know exactly where they have been, and I know where they're headed.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, it's remarkable. We are run by tens of thousands of programs. And then what we experience today is sort of a manifestation. And people know that word today more than ever. It's like we manifest life circumstances through our thoughts. But then what are the thoughts, and how do we access them? What's real, what's not real, what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. There's a lot, it's a different logic. So, and I appreciate you saying that, because one of my students actually is an internist, a doctor, just graduated. And we focused on training high caliber psychologists and doctors who want to keep their medical focus, and then also understand that the emotional and subconscious world and infuse it and use it to help people, use those to help people.
Yeah, definitely agree. Yeah, that is like the familiar past, the recent past, and the familiar future. Like we're living, most people, and I mean, I'm sure me too, unless we break it in different ways and we take conscious action to actually create a future that is different from the patterns that we've been doing. And it takes conscious effort to actually bring that forth. And that is so true to do that. And so when you're going to work with these people, because I think, you know, from how is the process and how is it in a way that, you know, when I started delving into all of this to actually go through my own journey, I realized that this is not so esoteric as one might think. There is like methods and process, and yeah, I'm okay with esoteric things too. Like, you know, we don't understand everything about the world. That's just a matter of a fact. But in terms of how is the process that you use to help people go through these? What are some of the things in your mind that you started that you start seeing in people to help them go through hardships?
Sure. No, I love the question because there's definitely a process, and you know, without a process, it cannot be approached because it's so complex. So what I have done, I created a system that's called the Expert Coach System, and it's a very methodical thing. What it does, it looks at a problem. It's almost like a problem grinder, and then we look at the symptom, and then the system already describes the key possibilities, and then I start talking to the client, and then, you know, through applying the system and the filters, it's sure enough, they're going to speak it exactly because it has to be. There's a recipe to a problem and there's a recipe for a solution. And that's what I put together. So this whole method, the whole approach is I understand what causes a problem. A person has tens of thousands of subconscious beliefs. A lot of these beliefs are actually opposing our healing. A lot of these beliefs actually are coming from ancestral times. Then, you know, many of them are not even known to people because they interact and they actually create internal conflicts. And then they create all sorts of like dissociated or rejected personalities and self-concepts. And so when I teach this, I actually break down the whole system for my students, and I show them how to listen to people. Okay, how to, and what are the fundamental things that there's several hundred of these things that the client or the patient will never be able to articulate. Because if they were able to articulate it, they wouldn't have, half the problem would go away. Because the reason why we have problems in life, or the biggest reason, is because we don't understand what caused the problem. Because we have tens of thousands of blind spots, and that's part of our evolution, part of our journey is to go, oh, that's how it works. Oh, that's why we go to school. That's how you write the letter A. Oh, I didn't know. I would have just scribbled had I not gone, right? So the system that I do is focuses on the problem, to decode the problem, and also ask and bring awareness for my patients or for my clients and my students to see what they would like to achieve instead. See, the two biggest problems that we have today is that people don't understand or don't know what they really want. If you ask someone, what do you want? They'll give you probably 9 out of the 10 answers will be a list of what they don't want. And they have no clarity about what they do want. And then the other problem is that we don't have our past resolved because it's a very complex process. And the past, based on the mind's mechanic, the mind will duplicate and repeat the same stories that we've always lived until we precisely, methodically disconnect it. So we are kind of like a runaway train without a brake. And then no one told us how to steer it or how to stop it. So that's what I do. It's like, oh, here, pull this lever, you know, so let's slow down. It won't stop overnight, but let's slow down. And then I'll show you why it became a runaway train. We can untrain the subconscious mind from creating the same type of negative momentum, and then we'll install beliefs and help retrain the mind so the person can shift the focus towards a more compelling future. And then through the laws of the universe, once we put our mind to something, a compelling future, it begins to manifest. And we also start disconnecting the negative repeating patterns. So combining these two meta or big ideas, then the person's life will turn around and the results will be just absolutely what they want. Phenomenal.
And when you're doing this process, me and my wife actually spent about like a month in Bali doing neuro-linguistic programming, you know,
Yes.
NLP. And do you use NLP in some of your stuff? Do you use other methods? Or your own method, of course, has so many things already that over your whole experience have incorporated?
Yes. I'm actually a certified master trainer of neurolinguistic programming. And what I have done is that I infused my NLP teachings with spiritual psychology because a lot of the principles that guide our lives are spiritually based. And spirituality means that our connection to the world. We are not separate from nature. We are not separate from God. We are not separate from each other. But through the conditioning, of that we've been of centuries of conditioning, there are many, many tens of thousands of like separations that we created in splits in our mind. So I do use, of course, NLP. I do use hypnosis. I do use quantum hypnosis. And I developed about roughly somewhere 40 to 50 of my own techniques, because I also saw that a lot of the traditional neurolinguistic programming tools are good. They're good for a specific problem. But as you know, since you studied it, there's a limit to it. And I don't like limits. So what I have done is like, all right, how can I like transition into the next phase? I created techniques that understand the psychology. And then within literally 50 minutes, I can help people heal a lifelong sexual trauma or trauma and work with 100 different things that happen in a moment. And that's why healing takes so long, is because when people only focus on the surface level, which is the story, what happened, but they don't know the precise recipe, the hundreds of things under, we're going to be focusing a little bit too much on what happened, but not really how it was documented. And what I work with is the documentation, the subconscious documentation. We go into the library and go, okay, let's do a garage sale. Let's look at this. And people go, oh my God, I had no idea. I had no idea this was here. That explains why I'm angry. That explains why I have this and that. And then through the process, people gain remarkable empowerment. Because empowerment is, as you know, once you start, doing these things, it's like, oh my gosh, this result is because of this, this, and that. That result is because of this. And once you see a logic to life, we become empowered because now we have a choice.
That's so on the money, because when I work with clients, one of the first things that we start doing is to look through any sensitivities that they have that can be tested. So we test them for food sensitivities, different sensitivities.
Yeah.
For instance, the last person that we did this with, very high numbers with lactose products, with milk and any sort of these products. And when she saw that number in the paper, it becomes undeniable.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow. Then I love how you said it, that then you have a choice. Then you have a choice. Then she has a choice. She knows that already. I don't have to do anything. She can take the choice to eat that stuff. It's going to probably create a bunch of problems in her stomach, even her neurology and her states, or not eat it. And so I think that is fascinating, that consciousness brings us the awareness of that we have a choice. And so how do you bring people to that point?
Well, I learned the hard way. At first I was one of the nice guys, like, hey, listen, you could change things and, wouldn't it be nice to have a good life? But I discovered something, and this is like created a huge shift for me. Part of our unconscious world that creates, or where the problems come from, and the problems don't come from necessarily because we've done something wrong. They come from because it is assisting us in our evolution. So in other words, what we would like to do unconsciously is draw a circle around us and call it our comfort zone. And then the universe goes, no, you'll never grow. So it pushes us out and it hurts. Oh, no, right? We don't like that. And the universe says, no, explore here. The circle inside is going to be deadly. Look, it's a death trap. It's everything but a comfort zone. So once we get pushed out, then what we need to do is have like different strategies to understand how to manage the bigger space, how to manage the thing. So when I tell people that they have a choice, I learned that I cannot be gentle about it. So I do educate them. I said, look, you are part of God. You're part of the universe. Through your thoughts, through your thinking patterns, through your emotions, negative and positive, you create a life. You create a lifestyle. 95% of it doesn't make sense to you. You have to study it. This is something, or take like professional coaching. But when you keep thinking this way, you will keep recreating same circumstance. For example, like you said, sensitivity. Now, did you know, and I learned this the hard way, you used to be so sensitive. sensitive to food, sensitive to noise, sensitive to people, sensitive to energy. I just wanted to shut down. I wanted to lock myself up. I wanted to kind of do the opposite of what we are designed for. What we are designed for is expansion. It's to reach out, to make new friends, to actually explore. But unfortunately, the pain was so big is that we do the opposite. And if I could like give a piece of advice, if I'm allowed to do it here, is to like, if life hurts, do the counterintuitive. If you feel like shrinking, start expanding, you know? And it's complex, but so here's what I do.
What you're saying, like, you know, if somebody has a phobia with elevators, I mean, the way to really get them through it is actually to get them in 1,000 elevators.
Yeah. And then so what I do is I explore why they have a phobia of elevators, because a phobia is an irrational fear response, right? So basically it's not about the elevator. It's what is the real fear? It's a fear of falling. And who has a fear of falling more than anyone? An infant. Right? So then what happened in infancy? What happened in the age of being, what specific traumatic event, whether they remember or not, created this lock-in, you know, this whole thing that the phobia emerged from.
See? I hadn't even thought about that.
Right? So, for example, an elevator phobia is two things. One is the fear of enclosed spaces, which is the fear of being choked. So these people potentially could also have like other like thyroid problems later. And then the other is the fear of falling. What if the elevator fails? I'll fall. And what will happen if I fall? Nobody will catch us. And this is kind of like goes even back to biblical references. We want to be caught. We want to be saved. We want to be saved. All of these are like ancestral patterns, but it comes out in the form of a phobia. And when you know the quantum psychology of it, you go, oh, it's three things. Boom, boom, boom. You know, it's the elevator is just sort of a metaphor that gave us the awareness of the problem. So, right?
Yeah.
Let me just quickly answer your question. But I tell them, I said, look, if you continue doing things the way you were doing, you're going to get the same results. I mean, it's like, you know, but here's a choice. Here's what you could do. You can make this and this and this choice. You embark on a different kind of journey. You take responsibility for your life. You start doing these things. And I know for a fact that your life will change. Is that what you want? And then this is what I wanted to tell you, doctor, is that then I work with a part of the mind. There's a fairly big part of the mind that actually is invested in holding on to the problem.
Yeah. Completely.
Part of our unconscious, well, you studied NLP, so you know it's called secondary gain. But it's really complex. It's like a person actually in the beginning could potentially have more reasons to not get better than in reasons to get better. So I explore that, you know, so it's a lot of fun because for me, it's like an operating system, you know, like a bunch of programs, and these programs oppose each other. You know, some apps are very helpful. You could type up your document and print from, and other apps are viruses. So I help people, you know, install good apps and then uninstall the viruses. And then once that happens, the whole life turns around and they come to life, they come alive. And they begin to manifest.
That's so interesting that you put it that way. So a couple months ago, we had Scott Pierce in our integrative medicine fellowship, and he was describing, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a pretty well-known psychiatrist, but he takes a lot of effort into being able to take a comprehensive approach to psychiatry. And he uses a lot of biofeedback, a lot of ancient wisdoms, a lot of medicine, of course, because he's a MD, and he's a really pioneer in the psychiatry area. And he always is very interesting because he describes the whole process as a processor, you know, software, hardware, all of in the same sort of language that you're using. And I really resonate with that a lot because it definitely is. And when you start looking more in depth in neural networks and how neural networks work and how we're understanding neurogenesis and neuroplasticity and our ability to do one more than the other, and then the process of the connectome, the connectome human project that is trying to actually quantify all of the different types of neural connections that are actually existing in human history, and then start graphing them out in each individual. Like, what is the anger emotion? What is the fear emotion? How does that look like in the brain, in the neural network? it is so incredibly interesting to look at it in a way that, yeah, I mean, it's like a software, it's a neural network. It is,
Yeah.
and just like a software, it has different tricks that you can rewire it,
Yeah.
tricks that you can reframe it.
I agree. And, you know, if I hadn't been in the high tech world as a software engineer and then a software manager, I would not know this. This would be difficult for me to understand. So what I have learned is my best successful clients and my best successful students are the ones that have a good, solid logic to them. And they also allow access to their emotions, because the emotions run the world. If we don't feel well, we're going to make decisions and say things based on that. But once we understand the logic of the emotions and what they really are trying to convey, combining these two worlds actually give us the power to change.
And so you're saying that understanding, okay, that I have the awareness to bring forth a problem that is conscious. So the logic to say, okay, every time I go into the elevator, I get fear. That logic, and then the awareness of the feeling that I'm getting, that oh, there is something happening, that I'm fearful every single time.
Yeah.
And then use those two modes to kind of start working together.
Exactly. Because one of the things that I struggled with for the longest time, because I'm a very logical guy and I will not speak about anything until I verified it many, many times, is when people say, if you're afraid, do it anyway. Well, to some degree, I can agree with it, but there's a danger to it, because if we are afraid of, say, snakes, go to them anyway. No, don't. You know, so because, for example, animals will smell our fear and they might attack us. So it's, you know, that there has to be like sensibility to this. But for example, in the elevator case, yeah, knowing that we have the emotion fear, it's a very complex emotion, because that could potentially be 100 different things. But yeah, so now we have the emotion. We don't respond to it by staying away from it and freaking out, because that would be the natural thing. Now we take a step back and we go, okay, so there's a logic to it. Something is causing it. And then we start understanding what causes it. And here's the cool thing. The moment we understand and break down the cause, 50% of the problem is gone. Mm-hmm. And then we go back and go, holy, you know, we just actually 3 major things. And then we apply the right subconscious technique and the whole problem goes away.
Mm. Absolutely. I completely agree. One time, so I came back from Bali, and I have all this information. And of course, you go back to being a doctor, same thing. But you're like, wow, there's so many things that I see now that NLP, for instance, could be used to help people. So I have a project, and we went to Guatemala, and they told me that this kid had seizures. We were seeing like hundreds of people. This kid comes in, and one of the persons that was there was like, well, we just need to start him on Keppra, which is a medication for seizures. And I said, let me kind of take a look at the kid and see what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so the kid was telling me that, I said, when did this happen? And he said, it happened when I was in the jungle and I saw a big snake and I dropped in the floor. And then, I mean, even talking about it, I could see his physiology. I could see his little heart pumping, and he's breathing a little faster, and all of these, and then all of these modes of the emotion. And then I said, and I asked the mom and the parents, I said, so how does it happen? And he says, well, it's the same thing. He starts doing like this. He drops in the floor, and so he's having seizures. And I was so interested. And so I did the process, you know, an NLP process, which you're very familiar with, to take him through before, a safe place before, go in his mind. And kids are so open to it. They're so
cool. Yeah.
He closed his eye, man, and he was just with me. Like, okay, I'm safe playing soccer, and then I'm safe right here. And then I took him through it, and he has his eyes closed. And I could see, as he's telling me the story of the snake, I mean, he starts getting his breath, his heart starts beating out of his chest. And then we do it again, and we run it again, and we run it again. And, you know, I followed up a month when we came back to the States, a month, 2 months later, no seizures anymore. Of course, he wasn't seizures. He was what he was going through. But it takes so much time, and the awareness of like that there is more. I probably, honestly, a year before that, I would have given him Keppra. And that's just so sad for me, how much things I don't know that can help people. You know?
But, you know, that's what I respect about you, is that you have the humility, the humbleness to say it. Because, you know, obviously, you know, incredible things, and you're willing to learn. And that's, I think, makes us the worthy human beings, that operate out of heart and then increase our worth by learning and expanding all the time.
Well, thank you for that, and for you too, the fact about like overcoming the stroke and turning that and completely changing the careers, and that's maybe something that like I have a question about that. How was it for you? Now you've lost that identity as a software developer, as a manager, as a leader. Like, how was it for you to start creating a new identity? Because how was that?
Okay. I appreciate the question. We have tens of thousands of identities, and many of them are suppressed. They're called our shadow characters. Many of them we don't want to talk about, and they're actually the ones that create most of our problems. So there are identities that are necessary for us to be successful, because there's a saying that our success cannot exceed our identities. So if we don't tell ourselves that we are successful and we are rich, those are kind of like the mantras or the affirmations, that we won't be able to reach it. But unfortunately, 99% of the identities that people tell themselves is negative. I'm a loser. I'm such a failure. I'm this. I'm that. They don't even know. They don't even have the vocabulary to list out the 10,000 things. I didn't have the vocabulary either. So what happened was I lost that identity. And I'll tell you a general answer, and I'll tell you a personal story. Whenever we lose an identity, our ego gets pissed. Our ego gets so angry because it wants us to think it's a loss, but it's not. I never lost my software engineering identity. My ego told me that I did. Basically, I was fighting it for 2 years. I was telling myself, like, why in the world did I spend so much money in engineering school? Why in the world did I go to electronics and then software engineering? And why, all the reasons, kind of like our anger, the self-perpetuating anger. And I tell you this, and one time I had a conversation with my brother, and he says, don't you realize that you would never be able to understand the logic of the mind? You'd never be able to create membership websites and actually teach online if you hadn't been a software engineer. That's what makes you so effective and exceptionally good at what you do. And I'm like, oh my God, So in other words, there's a general thing that when we think we lose an identity, we never lose it. We have to transcend it. Okay. And there's an evolutionary aspect to the whole thing, which is moving from the employee world, a safe paycheck, even if I don't feel well, even if my output is poor that day, I'll get the same paycheck. So there's some sort of a safety and security in it. So I had to transition out of it, and I had to transition to entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is not what people think. Entrepreneurship is tough. You have to become a good marketer. You have to become not only an absolute artist at what you do, but also a good communicator. You have to really work through your rejection for money and advertising and sales. And I'm sure you've been through it since you've done self-development. So that's what was hard for me, is to fight my own anger and my own rage, which I know I teach now in my advanced quantum courses, where they come from. It's the ego has a very sneaky recipe for rage. That's actually part of the thing that causes seizures. And then also how to transition into this new world and then install the necessary identities so we can actually thrive in that new environment. So
yeah, go ahead.
So just one thing, like we should never ever, and this is my thing that I learned the hard way, because I used to be very more like a darker kind of thinking person, like always focusing on the past and the losses. So what I learned is to really transcend past losses and past identities and never leave them behind, bring them forward, take away the lessons, what we learned from them, and then install the new identities that we need so that we can function and thrive in the new world. Most people don't do either.
Yeah. Right? Exactly. I mean, it's amazing that identity is built into now what you do. And even with the psychology and the software of looking at the mind, I mean, and so that's why I love that book by Wayne Dyer, I Can See Clearly Now, that looking back, it's like, I can see clearly now why I went through that horrific setting and an incident, because without it I couldn't be who I am, or why I thought I wasted so much time in this career, but it built up into this, you know. And so
Yeah.
um, and definitely and so in terms of shadow work, I think that's such an interesting story. And I think in medicine too, we don't, in healthcare, we don't even use it, we don't even know what it is, we don't know how to help people. When you mentioned that the rage causes seizures, in the hospital we have a term, pseudo seizures, right, where
Hmm.
people are convulsing, but when you check their EEG, there is really not a seizure going on,
Yeah.
right? And there are seizures that are actually triggered by stress and lack of
Yeah.
sleep and certain emotions
Yeah.
and light patterns. And you can do that repeatedly. And so, how is that you said that there is certain anger and the ego and the shadow can come up forward to create something that is like a seizure or a seizure? How?
Okay. So I'll give you a simple example, and this goes very deep. Excuse me. So, when you study NLP, and like a traditional NLP, maybe a master practitioner level, you get a good amount of breakthroughs. Okay. But underneath it, there's 80% more. There's like a million layers more. And a lot of these deep rages, the stuff that, we've been sort of talking about, come from this deeper world, which I call the quantum world. So there's a quantum psychology to this. And for example, I don't know if you've done it, I did it, but you see this everywhere, where a 3-year-old or a 2.5-year-old throws a temper tantrum. Okay. A temper tantrum really is a power struggle with unconscious, a power struggle with an authority conflict, and an authority figure rather, and that could be our parent. Typically, our parent is the one that gets to watch and enjoy the show, right? So there's the authority conflict. So we have thousands of authority conflicts inside us, and these authority conflicts are the ones that create these rages, that creates the shaking, that create all these things. But there's like a precise system to it, a method. So whenever we basically, it's a poorly communicated rage is what it is. And it's our ego's unresolved, suppressed stories, raging stories that have been there potentially for centuries. It's part of the collective consciousness, part of our individual journey. And then we carry it out, we act it out. We act it out for the purposes of awakening to it, and then finding the root causes and healing it, and it will go away.
That's so interesting that you said that, because it almost feels like when something happens to us and we get completely outraged, it's like we're having a power struggle with our source.
Yes, exactly. You got it. Actually, it's the way I teach it is in spiritual psychology. It's called our ego's conflict with God. Okay, so it really is the conflict with our source.
It's just a representation of what happens to a toddler. Is just a little bit macro, a little bit
Absolutely.
the next version of it.
Yeah, it's a micro story of what we've been carrying in our neurology for potentially thousands of years.
Wow, that's
so. And the cool thing is, it's the same story. The same composition, rather, the same psychology. It's just, a little easier to understand because we can observe it. But where it comes from, the raging toddler or the temper tantrum toddler is just a reenactment of something that we already have been having.
Wow.
It's a replay. It's just a replay.
That's so interesting.
What I do is just go back, way back, thousands of years ago, and then work with the psyche, work with the mind to let go of the original story.
Huh. That's so interesting because a lot of times, when people say surrender doesn't look like this, surrender, it looks like this, that you're kind of like, okay, and I see it in the hospital when people are about to die. Some people cannot let it go. And some people are so unsatisfied and they have such a hard time letting go of life, and that they want to go back and do it again, and they want their regrets and all these things. But there is so many people who are like, I'm ready to go. Like, I surrender. Let me just make me comfortable. I'm at peace. I want to be around my family. and they thrive through even that, you know. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
it's so amazing, and you can tell there is no power, there is no power struggle, there is
No.
this disconnectedness, this peace. And then when you said spiritual psychology, so what is spiritual psychology and quantum psychology? What are those two things?
Okay. So spiritual psychology is something that actually you can take a course in, and it talks about our connection with the universe. If people have a religious background, this is kind of like a surprise to them that even the Bible is an extremely well-written spiritual psychology book.
Gotcha.
It's a relationship to God, it's a relationship with the world. So spirituality means our big picture, or connection to the universe. But the thing with the Bible is that it's like a 50,000 foot overview, and then most people don't have the recipe to specifically break down a problem and then follow it, but it's a good overall thing, right? So what I teach is actually the systematic recipe, how to overcome this problem, the relationship problem, how to overcome the heartbreak, how to overcome this and that, and it all applies to the spiritual thing. Okay, now here's the difference. So spiritual psychology means that we are not dogmatic. That means that we understand our place in the universe. We understand our connection to nature, our connection to each other as humans. So we're all one, all energy. And that's the whole fundamental premise. The reason why people have any kind of problem is because they pushed away and rejected aspects of life and aspects of themselves. So in spiritual psychology, we bring it all back. So for example, I'll give you something like whatever we don't want to be observed as, like I would never want to be seen as or talked about as blank. That actually is a secret belief about ourselves. We believe whatever we don't want to hear. It's we deep down believe that we are that, and it's so painful that our mind, you know NLP, so you understand the term, dissociates it. Our ego dissociates it. We pushes it away, but anything that we push away will become painful. Give it 10 years or more. Mm-hmm. So oneness means is that we bring back the tens of thousands of dissociated cells. So that spiritual psychology is understand that we are one, but then how specifically to achieve it. Okay, quantum psychology then goes underneath all that. It goes into the astral plane, goes into the ego's tantrums and rages against the world, the ego's secret agendas. The ego hides 50% of a lot of our true reasons and true problems on the astral plane. And the astral plane is just a different dimension, different frequency range. Okay. And in the quantum psychology, I get into the astral psychology, the ego's tricks that create all this crazy relationship stuff that, you know, when some people get a little bit of help and they're fine, but then more and more people, what I've seen is that they get a little better and then they get worse again. And it's because the deep stuff has never been handled. So, okay, so kind of like this ego's tantrums and rage is definitely in the quantum world. It's like in the, you know, I don't know if you know, like Akashic records. I do a lot of past life regression. So the Akashic records,
yeah, exactly,
is on the astral plane, and the higher band and the astral plane. And so that's once you know that stuff, then no problem is a problem. So I honestly, Doctor, I feel so blessed because here I am like a crazy software guy, but also have overcome like a million of my different problems, my ancient heartbreaks, my digestive issues. And I feel so fortunate, and I feel so also excited to share it. At first I used to be so like, not scared of it, but I felt like, I think people are going to think I'm crazy. Mm-hmm. But because I'm such an engineering mind, I never talk about it until I see the validity of it. And it's proven over and over and over again. And today I just like, you know what? I'm sharing it anyway, because this is a miracle. That's where miracles come from. Once you understand this 10,000 domino effects. So we are here, we are the last domino. Anything that we don't like is because it's coming from somewhere. Let's explore where it's coming from.
Yeah, you're so right. And when it really changed for me, when it was, I was in a Tony Robbins Date with Destiny event.
Yes.
And the day where he does the suicide, that he, you know, it's a room of 3,000 successful people. And he says, okay, who's suicidal? And 10% of the room raises their hands.
Yeah.
And then he has the courage to say, okay, let's do it. Not only the courage, but the skills to deal with
Yeah.
that. As a doctor, I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. Like, how many rules are being broken? How many laws are, all these things. But I was so intrigued because that is such a big problem all over the world. Nobody
Yeah.
knows how to deal with it. And one of the stories was a man who his wife had hung herself 3 weeks before, and his daughter brought him there. She didn't know what to do with him. He was a successful multimillionaire businessman who'd been incredibly in charge of his own life, and then this happens, and he doesn't know what to do. He's
Hmm.
lost. And to watch the progression of a 3 or 4 hour intervention, going through all the different things that Tony went through,
Hmm.
and at the end, 3,000 people gave this man a hug, you know,
Yeah.
and I mean, in that moment, he felt so much better. Healing will be the right word because everything came together. The word healing is a wholeness coming
Yes.
together. That story came together of what was the meaning of that in his life. And then the next day I saw him and we talked in the hallway for a little bit. And he said, all of the love that you guys gave me and all of this has healed me. Like I feel
Yeah.
so much better about life in the future and I have so much to do.
That's
And he said, if you have a dream, go for it. And so that's when I understood that the medical community, we have amazing things. We have a lot of tools. We save people's lives. There is so much more that we haven't incorporated. And it was my moral obligation to learn and incorporate all of this because I mean, if that happened, there is so much more that we can do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that was, I'm so intrigued to hear all that because it really takes a caliber person and a character like you to be able to start the domino effect. And it's a good domino effect, okay, to make that impact. Because if we talk to the person who's suffering, and I'm going to explain the 3 main reasons for suicide, he's going to go, I don't care, help me. I don't want to learn, I want to feel better. But since you are already seeing the big picture, you're dealing with patients, you're saving their lives, you're interacting with a bigger community, then you starting a domino effect, or you starting a movement. I think that's what the world needs more today. So I really, really, really am very grateful that I met you.
Yeah, same here. Whenever you were going through everything, what was one of the times that you thought to yourself, I can't do this. This is all over. Like, there is no way. I'm done. What was, or was there a time like that that you felt like, man, this is too much, or not too much, but that sort of moment where you're like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's a good one. I'll tell you my personal experience and then kind of a general example. I had several of those waves, but most people have like 3 sides, even though we think that it's only 2. The coin, we have a strong side, we have a weak side, and then we have a very dark side. Okay. And when we give into the weak side, that's when people get that's when they act weak. That's when they act like a victim. That's when they resign. Okay. So I went through cycles of it, but my strong side is very strong. So my identities of the perseverant, of the diligent, of the survivor, of all of these identities were keeping me going. Even though I could barely walk, they said, get me out of here. I'll fix it. I'll crawl. I'll fly if I have to. I'll learn how. I don't know how. So if people had more of these installed in them and then got the proper mentorship, then we'd be in a different place today as a whole, as humanity. But the problem with, if we only have these things, we burn out. That's what burnout is. Having way too much unconscious opposition, and then, these, character traits that want to keep us moving, but we are dragging a semi-truck up the hill and we wonder why we can't move forward, right? It's too heavy, it's too much. So that's sort of the main thing. And for me, what it was is that I was very rebellious. I was very strong and determined, and that determination, I think, was saved my life. And I did go through phases, and I actually, and then I had a few people who pulled me out of my sinking.
Yeah, and it's so powerful too. How
Yeah,
much it impacts us being pulled out, being pulled out of it.
Yeah.
With what's next for you?
Well, I am going to continue teaching my training course called the Expert Coach System, where we focus on training the next generation of expert coaches that can really help people overcome health, relationship, and the money problems, and then create a movement, create a mission so that we could really help humanity as a whole understand that we are in full control of our lives, complete and total. We have the complete and total ability to make wonderful things happen, but we have to unhook a lot of our mental processes that are negative. So that's my mission. Sharing my knowledge. I have the system. Took me 11 years. I spent nearly $1 million on this education. If you look at me, like I've been like working 24/7 for the last couple of years. I don't have a life, but I do have a life because I live a very purposeful life. And that's what I help people achieve. How to get out of this the resigned mode of operation and create meaning and purpose, and then do it together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think when you have that purpose, it's like somebody says, the most important days of your life is the day that you were born, and the second day is the day that you realize why,
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, yeah, once there is like that purpose, that calling, it's pretty powerful. And so how can people hear about your stuff? How, if they want to find more?
Well, I'm on social media. So again, my name is Robert Szentes, and I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, and also have a website. It's my company is called Advanced Mind Institute. And the web link, the URL is amindinstitute.com. One word. So it's A for Apple, for Advanced, and amindinstitute.com. And, I share my podcasts. I share my different online programs and online courses. And if people want private coaching, they can also book a session and we'll explore if it's a good fit.
Great. Awesome. Well, Robert, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and just an awesome conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Again, nice meeting you.
Yeah, same here.